Becoming Orthodox wasn't an angry decision. It was actually just finding the faith that I was looking for. Even though I had a theology degree, it wasn't a profound theological debate within my soul. It was just, we wanted to start a family. By the way, my wife did not take it well. She asked me point blank, why should we do this? I could only just be honest with her. And my response to her was, well, you know, when we have grandchildren, I want to be able to go to church and I want to have the same faith and the same liturgy that my grandchildren have. That
Yeah.
was that, just that simple, you know?
Today I have Father Alexis Baldwin on the show. It's great to have you on, Father.
It's good to be on. It's good that we finally got this opportunity.
It's been a joy to be able to share some phone conversations with you and get to know you more, and to finally have you on the show. We've been talking about it for a while. And to hear your story. We're going to hear about your journey into Orthodoxy and becoming an Orthodox priest. And from my understanding, you were born cradle Roman Catholic.
Yes, that's correct.
And so
Born
we'll
and
get to hear.
raised.
Gotcha. And currently, you serve at a parish in Arkansas?
Yeah, in Fort Smith, Arkansas, kind of the western part of Arkansas, almost Oklahoma, as a matter of fact.
And you've been serving in the South for a bit, right? I mean, you've been in a few different states with missions.
Yeah, that's correct. Most of my priesthood, I've served missions. I graduated St. Tikhon's Seminary back in 2013, and originally I went to seminary from the Diocese of the West. And my first assignment was out in Colorado Springs at Holy Theophany with Father Anthony Carbo of blessed memory. So I was out there for about a year. And then we had the opportunity to go to the Diocese of the South, and we ended up pretty quickly in South Carolina, where I served for almost 6 years in South Carolina. And during that time, I also served a mission in rural South Georgia. And then after that, we were asked to go to serve some missions in Mississippi, which we did for about 3 years. And then, you know, in 2023, June of 2023, we were asked to come out to Fort Smith, Arkansas. So we've been here happily ever since. So thank God.
Oh, wonderful. You're like a pioneer mission church planting Orthodox priest.
Yeah, you know, when we were in Mississippi, it was really a beautiful time, and it was a beautiful opportunity. We served at 4 different communities, so we were at a church, pretty much a different church every Sunday. You know, we would serve at the kind of the main church for the OCA there, Holy Resurrection in Clinton, Mississippi. And then the other 3 Sundays, we would travel to the 3 different missions that are across the state, and we would serve, Vespers and liturgy, and kind of we would divide up feast days among the different communities. So I was a circuit riding Orthodox priest.
That's what I was going to say. You need like a horse to be traveling from parish to parish, right? Maybe just get like a Honda Accord or something. Yeah.
we opted for the budget line. We bought our Ford Transit.
There you go.
Cart around all the family.
Yes.
So that was our
Yes,
horse.
we have one of the 12 passenger vans too. We've got a Nissan that takes us to church and other places as a big family. We have 7 kids. Do you have 6 or 7?
We actually have 8. We just had
Okay.
our 8th child last year, and my wife and I have 7 boys, and the 8th was a girl. So God bless us for the final. I know it's cause for jubilation. You know?
Well, she has many protectors. 7 older brothers.
Yeah, she's a real joy, and the boys get along with her really well. They really love her, so thank God. It's a blessing.
That is a huge blessing. Well, I know we could talk about our kids during the whole interview, but let's go ahead and move on. Let's go ahead and move on to your story, and I would love to hear about your journey into the Orthodox faith. So you grew up cradle Catholic. Where did all this begin? Your story.
Yeah, that's really kind of an interesting thing to think about, the perspective. I mean, not that I'm super special, important, or anything, but you know, when I was when I kind of share my journey, people will often ask if my father was in the military, which he was just long before I was born. But we did move around a lot. But I'm originally from Indiana, but I was so young when we moved from Indiana. I was born in Indianapolis. I was so young when we moved from Indianapolis. I think I was about a year and a half old. And I don't really have any memories of living in Indiana. We moved to the Mississippi Delta, and that's pretty much where I spent my childhood. It was in Mississippi. We had a brief, almost 11 months when we lived in Indianapolis again in 1989. But other than that, we kind of lived in southeast Mississippi for most of my childhood and my early teen years. So what I tell people is that, I was born in Indianapolis, but I'm really from Mississippi because that's where I grew up. That's what I know. That's what I learned, when I went to school. And we lived in a couple of different places in Mississippi. But as you might imagine, it was a little bit of a challenge to grow up in the rural South as a Roman Catholic, especially because most people were Baptist. So, now that I'm 43 and I have some experience living in Mississippi, I can say in some ways things have kind of become more positive. But I do remember growing up, people would often ask me, where I went to church. I would tell them that I was Roman Catholic, and they would then say, "So are you Catholic or are you Christian?" I got that a lot growing up, a lot. So in some ways, though, I would say it was a blessing to have grown up where, in the way that I did. We had really great neighbors. I had a really good experience in childhood. And even though, occasionally it was a challenge being Catholic in Mississippi, now I look back at that experience and some of the people that I think they meant well, but their theology was a little off. Um, I'm grateful for their prayers because I think that in some ways God did use their prayers. He did certainly use their prayers, and I'm appreciative for it. And I also I'm kind of saddened by seeing the folks that I knew growing up, because some of them have walked away from their Christian faith. So I think it's an interesting thing for me to think about. I think about it often. I thank God for their prayers, but I also now, whereas maybe when I was younger I was a little annoyed by them, now I try to pray for them. So it's an interesting thing to have had that experience. But it wasn't really until after high school almost that I began to learn more about Christian history. I was always interested in my faith as a Catholic, but I wouldn't say we were cultural Catholics. We weren't C&E Catholics. It wasn't Christmas and Easter only. We went to Mass most Sundays. We would often go to the vigil masses on Saturday nights, but we also went to Mass pretty much every Sunday. And it was important for my parents that we were Catholic and that we prayed together. So we certainly weren't cultural Catholics in that sense, but there wasn't necessarily a super robust spiritual life in my family growing up. And I don't say that as a criticism of my family, just kind of reflecting on the difference between, the faith now that I've received and then, the faith I grew up in. There's a distinct difference. And again, I want to stress, I don't say that to be critical of my parents. In fact, both my mother and my father actually have converted to Orthodox, and they're Orthodox Christians. So I certainly don't want to seem critical of them in any way. But we just didn't. There were so many things we didn't know. My parents, there were so many things they didn't know as well, and so they taught me what they knew, and then later on we came to know more. And it was really my inquisitive nature that kind of got me to ask the question about why we did the things that we did as Catholics. And pretty much in my teenage years, I became really, um, you know, kind of fixated on the things about Catholicism. And I guess part of it was just being forged in fire, so to speak, right? When you're not necessarily having to defend your faith per se, but you are having to kind of explain to people that you don't worship Mary and things like that. You know, you could go either way. You could be kind of be indifferent, or you could become a little bit more inquisitive. And I think I just became more inquisitive as a teenager. And as I started learning things and finding more information about the Catholicism and studying church history, then I started to bump into Orthodoxy here and there. It was really I was really stumbling, so to speak, and which, again, now looking back, it's such an interesting experience. You know, Mississippi is one of the places that can say that an Orthodox saint visited, and it's one of the states. In fact, Saint Raphael of Brooklyn visited Vicksburg, Mississippi, in something like 1915. You know, and you know, I upon discovering this, I thought, oh, that's a nice little blip in the news, but actually, there's so many news articles that were written about St. Raphael in the Mississippi papers, especially in Vicksburg. They wrote dozens of articles about him in that time period. So it wasn't
Wow.
really a hidden thing.
Hmm.
So, you know, to have that history kind of in my backyard, so to speak, and not even to know about it, I think was kind of an interesting thing. But we just didn't
Do you,
know about Orthodoxy.
I was thinking he was quite the pioneer. When you see how much he traveled, I kind of did a little bit of investigation to see if he would spend any time in Indiana. I couldn't find a lot. I think he did pass through, but there isn't. I couldn't find like news articles like what you have. But you find inspiration from Saint Raphael as someone who's been kind of going from mission to mission.
You know, honestly, a lot of those saints in that time are inspirational, and it's it's such a blessing to know these holy men and women that we've had in our church, and you know the fervency of their faith. In some ways, for a long time, it was almost like an untold story. Um, More recently, maybe in the past 20 years, we've seen an enormous amount of effort that's been given by people like Matthew Namey and, you know, Father Stephen Damick, and a number of people who have written and done research and published things and talked about it. Father Tom Soroka. Just a lot of people over the years have talked about these things, had books that have been published, and so many other priests and lay people who have published essays and books about these saints and their amazing efforts. They are inspirational. And, you know, when I was out in Colorado Springs, it was only a year, but I remember having this just amazing experience being in the cathedral in the Denver and OCA Cathedral. And, you know, he visited out there, St. Tikhon did. And I remember going out to Calhan, which is a tiny town out just, you know, east of forgive me, my Colorado brethren, if my geography is a little off. I did live there. I should know better. But I think it's, if I recall correctly, it's east of Colorado Springs. But I remember being out there, and they took me to the church, St. Mary's, and then next to it, they said, okay, here's this church, but St. Tikhon was here, and when he was here, he blessed this ground to build this church that eventually got built there. You know, so I thought, man, this is phenomenal. This is, you know, beautiful. And then we were in the cathedral in Denver, and I was in the altar, you know, for liturgy, and they were saying, you know, under this altar is an altar that St. Tikhon built by hand. You know, so to
Wow.
have these experiences and to know that they did these things, you know, with a mind to spread orthodoxy, with a mind to preach the gospel and to bring it to people, it was really inspirational. And they went through a lot of challenges and heartaches. I remember finding in Mississippi this uh, short work. It was like 12 pages, and or something like this. There was a lady who, it was in the library. I just went to the library and I typed up Orthodox Christianity or something to see what they had there. And in the system there, in the area, they had this little essay that this lady had written about this parish priest who was traveling in places. I don't remember where it was, but it was maybe Colorado, places like that. But it was so long ago. But it was just a detail of his trips out there and the things that he did and the depths that he went to serve these people who were just in remote areas. You know, it was like 100 years ago. And I remember in one particular instance, they were recounting, he traveled by train and by horse to go to this even more remote place because there was a man who was dying. And they told him when he got into town, they said, so and so's dying. He's in this further town out. You have to go see him. You have to, give him communion. Hear his confession, give him communion because he's going to die. And so he got on horse. Then he goes to the train. Then he gets to the train, gets off, and gets off on another horse. Well, then he misses something, so he has to go, and it's pouring rain, and he's like traveling for days. And he gets there, and he's, basically he's almost half dead, this poor priest. And he gets to this place finally, this little tiny one-horse town, so to speak. And the man has been waiting for like a week for the priest to come. So the priest comes in, he gets his composure, he hears the man's confession, he gives him Holy Communion, and then 30 minutes or an hour later, the man dies.
Wow.
So just beautiful stories of the so many priests and laity have kept the faith, and so certainly our saints are inspirational.
Hey guys, I just want to share a few books with you that have left a big impact on my life. One of them is Bearing God, the Life and Works of St. Ignatius of Antioch, the God Bearer by Father Andrew Stephen Damick. Many people have a paradigm shift when they begin reading the letters of St. Ignatius of Antioch. Well, this little book by Father Andrew is so helpful in navigating his letters and summarizing the key themes. So I think you'll enjoy this book. Another book that's very popular that left a big impact on my life is The Religion of the Apostles by Father Stephen DeYoung. This is quickly becoming a classic. It's helped people sort of understand how the Old Testament and New Testament have a continuity with the early church, the church fathers. I've also had Father Joseph Lucas on the show. I think this is going to be a classic. It just came out last year, How to Read the Holy Fathers, a guide for Orthodox Christians. And it takes you through those different genres, different styles of writing by the church fathers, because you're going to read poetry and hymns differently than you're going to read responses to heretics. So check out these books and more. Many of them are by Ancient Faith Publishing. All right, guys, we'll see you next time. Were you like in high school or college, young adult years? What was the time frame for that exploration?
To be honest, I think my earliest memory of when I became aware that there was something called Orthodox Christianity was almost, it would have been my senior year of high school. You see, my senior year of high school, I moved with my father out to Phoenix, Arizona. And literally within days of moving out there, we attended this big Catholic church that was across the street from the high school I was going to attend. And they had spent just enormous amounts of money digging out this ground they wanted a church that was like going into a cave. So they dug out this hill and this ground and built the church. So you'd walk in and you'd walk down. And then it had like kind of like Coliseum stadium seating around the first level and the second level. And then the altar was way down at the bottom. So you'd walk down the stairs and there was like a fountain there that doubled as a baptismal font. And then the back there was an enormous space for classrooms. There was a stage back there, and it was kind of like an auditorium, and that's where they did the youth group. And so, that's where I met my wife within days of moving to Phoenix, within days of going to church. I met her at church, at Catholic church, but that church had something like, when I was a teenager, it had something like 5,000 families attending. Not people, 5,000 families attending. So
like a Catholic megachurch, yeah.
Well, and that was very common in the Diocese of Phoenix because there are quite a few Catholics. There's a lot of people in Phoenix. But I think something to keep in mind is, I was born in '82. So in my high school years, we basically had AOL or something close to that. We didn't really have the kind of internet that we have now. I mean, the cell phones and all that. That was not, obviously, the technology was not there. So, if you didn't find out about Orthodoxy from somebody that you knew, if you didn't find out about it from the library or a class or something like that, you really literally had to bump into it. So my earliest memory of that, again, it's pretty late in life in some ways, is being in high school, and the priest at the Catholic Church gave a talk, and he had set up kind of like this scale kind of thing, like on this side is Catholicism, and then on the other side is whatever, right? And he was trying to explain denominations to people and how close these denominations were on this scale to Catholics. And so he had like a whiteboard, and he put Catholic over here. So that was the fullness, that was, and then people would call it names like Presbyterian, Methodist, Anglican, Episcopalian. He said, oh, the Anglican, Episcopalian, same. And, Baptist, non-denominational, things like that. And then everybody had kind of satisfied all the things, and he kind of put them all there. And then he said, well, anybody else? Can I think of anybody else? And it was, it had to be Christian, obviously. And then somebody said, well, what about Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox? And he went to go put a mark on that scale, and he went and he was going to go put it like right before Catholic, but then he stopped and he turned around and he looked at all of us and he goes, well, they're just like us, except they have all the smells and bells. And I remember thinking in my teenage brain, what are the smells and bells he's talking about? What are those smells and bells? I want to know what because the church that I was attending was very youth oriented, the Catholic Church. In fact, it was a little bit jarring when I first attended because, I was in the rural South. We had a very respectable, the most controversial thing at our church was that there was a lady who wanted to play classical style guitar on a classical guitar in the choir during Mass. And this was like a huge thing, like, oh my gosh, not guitar. But it wasn't rock guitar, it was classical. It wasn't even folky. And she was classically trained. So she played well, but that was like a scandal. Men wore ties, and at the time of the sign of peace, a man would shake another man's hand, but he would not shake a woman's hand, and he definitely was not going to shake a child's hand because that's a child. Women could, shake each other's hands, but that's the kind of Catholicism I grew up with. It wasn't traditionalist, it wasn't in Latin, it was very contemporary, but it was like, early 70s style contemporary traditional Catholic, it's very respectable, so when I came to, in high school, when I came to this church in Phoenix, and it was like, there's all these young people, and Mass was at 5 p.m. on Sunday night. And, they were singing all these songs I'd never heard. Later, I found out some of them were on the Christian radio, right? They were singing praise and worship songs at the Mass. And they had a rock band up there with a drummer and a guitar player. And, they were playing electric pianos. It was like, yeah, this was fantastic. But it was a little bit jarring because I didn't know that kind of Catholicism existed, you see. And so that kind of began my journey to kind of investigate what are these things? What are these smells and bells? What did Catholicism used to be like? If there's a difference, what did it used to be like? And it wasn't before too long that people started talking about reinstituting the Latin Mass. And so as I got a little older and got into, started getting to junior college, because I didn't go to college right away. I graduated high school and I decided, well, I'll go to junior college for a little while. And they were reintroducing the Latin Mass. That was kind of something that had spread out in Phoenix. And so we decided to attend a Latin Mass. And I really liked it. But I just wondered, well, what's going on? Why is there this difference? Why isn't everything just kind of the way it used to be? Why did it change? So that kind of led me on that path of looking into things. And we had a little foray into Byzantine Catholicism. There was a Byzantine Catholic cathedral in the area that we attended, and it was very strange, but I liked it because it was so strange. And everything was in English. So I thought, well, here's something that has the smells and bells, but it's not in a foreign language. It's not in Latin. It's not in Greek or whatever. It's just in English. And I really liked it. But around that time, we decided to, my wife, well, obviously she wasn't my wife at the time, but we were deciding that, well, we wanted to get married, but I hadn't graduated college. She wanted to go to college. So our plan was, okay, we know we want to get married. We're not going to get engaged, but we're going to go off to college. And after we finish college, then we'll get married and we'll start our family. So, I was living with my dad. She was living with her parents. And we went off to college. We selected Catholic universities because we were getting very serious about our faith, and we wanted to have a Catholic education from a Catholic university. And so, as it turned out, she ended up going to a Catholic university in Pittsburgh, and I ended up going to Franciscan University in Steubenville. So it was that was an experience in itself too, which plays a part.
I didn't realize that you went to Steubenville.
I did.
Wow. Okay.
Mm-hmm. I did. I got a degree in theology. My undergraduate was at Franciscan University of Steubenville. And you see, to kind of, couch this together, once I had experienced the Latin Mass, once I had experienced Byzantine Catholicism, one of the things that I decided did not want to return to was the kind of Catholicism that I was seeing that was very prominent in Catholic churches. The charismatic renewal was really big in Phoenix. Yeah. So if you're familiar with that?
Yes.
Yeah. So that was the kind of Catholicism that was very prominent in the Catholic churches that I was attending. And I did not want to return to that because I felt like I don't really recognize it as part of church history and tradition. And it's a very odd thing. It just felt like a superimposed kind of Pentecostalism into Catholicism. And I just thought, well, why don't we just return to the traditions of the Catholic Church instead of whatever this is? So,
I can acknowledge the goodness of wanting to embrace a robust doctrine of the Holy Spirit. That's a good thing. But how it caused some overhauls and the way it impacted worship and liturgy, very problematic. Yes.
Well, and it's true. I don't want to denigrate Catholics in any way or Catholicism in any way, but my experience in the Catholic Church growing up in my teen years and even as a young adult, I can't discount it. I can't pretend like it never happened. Sometimes some of the things that I've seen, I revisit it and think, well, did that really happen? Because it was just so absurd that would be going on. For instance, we attended World Youth Day when I was still Catholic. You're familiar with World Youth Day?
Yes, all of it. Yeah. Most of these things you'll mention, I'll probably be familiar with these things.
So World Youth Day, we in Cologne, Germany, we attended that, and we were there in this cathedral, and it was for a Vesper service, and I still have the flyer from the Vesper service. And of course, this is Germany, so now all the Catholics are probably going to be groaning, and they're going to go, "Oh, he's going to talk about German Catholics." Well, yes, but I was naive. I just thought, and everybody, when we got there, there was a German Pope, right? It's Pope Benedict. He was the Pope. So, I thought, we'll go to his homeland. We'll see how things are. And, I get to this cathedral and they're doing a Vesper service. And I'm not even joking. This isn't made up. I wish it was made up. But one of the songs they sang at the Vespers service was Imagine. And they even sang the line, "Imagine there's no religion," in the church. And Lord have mercy. But, at the closing hymn that they sang was "We Are the World," and the altar servers threw a beach ball into the crowd in the church, and it had the world on it. I mean, I guess okay, but everybody's bouncing it around, singing "We Are the World," and I just thought, what are we doing? What is this? What you know? So I have had these experiences in the Catholic Church, and at the same time, I don't bring them up because I want people to have the idea that I was running away from Catholicism. Actually, it just played a role in me kind of investigating church history. And,
Right.
becoming Orthodox wasn't an angry decision. It was actually just finding the faith that I was looking for and being able to live that faith in the parish church that I was looking for. It really was just that simple. It wasn't even, even though I had a theology degree, it wasn't a profound theological debate within my soul. It was just, we wanted to start a family. And when we were considering converting to Orthodoxy, by the way, my wife did not take it well. She was not happy that I wanted to become Orthodox. And she asked me point blank, why should we do this? And I could only just be honest with her. And my response to her was, well, when we have grandchildren, I want to be able to go to church and I want to have the same faith and the same liturgy that my grandchildren have. That
Yeah.
was just that simple, So that's what we found in Orthodoxy. So much to my chagrin, when I arrived at Franciscan University, because I did not do my research, I just thought, why watch EWTN? Mother Angelica says that Franciscan University is phenomenal. But when I arrived there, I discovered that the campus spiritual life was very charismatic. So I did not want to go to that. So we started attending the Byzantine Catholic churches in the area. I lived off campus, which at that time was allowed. And then I lived in one of the off-campus dorms that was not on campus, which they've since discontinued all of that. But that gave me the opportunity to attend different services. But really, even when we attended Byzantine Catholic liturgy and we were part of the Melkite Catholic Church for a while, the thing that I came to know is that there was a lot missing in the tradition and the practice, even among the Melkites. And so, I wanted to go somewhere for Vespers on Saturday night. I'd go to, if the Eastern Catholic or Byzantine or Ukrainian, whoever, if they had Vespers on Saturday night, I was the only one there. And oftentimes, this is Pittsburgh, oftentimes there would be this huge church, 100 years old, that could accommodate 300-400 people, and just me and the priest for Vespers. And I thought, why isn't this more important? What are we doing? And so we started attending for Vespers, one of the local Orthodox churches. And now granted, there weren't a ton of people. Oftentimes there were 8 or 10, but in all fairness, the Orthodox Church only usually had about 60 people for liturgy on Sunday. So, there weren't going to be a lot of people there anyways. But that's when we really kind of started to encounter that faith that we were looking for. So when I say I kind of stumbled upon it, that's what I mean. It was just like this series of little events that happened in my life where we just kind of stumbled into Orthodoxy, so to speak,
Yeah,
that's kind of how we encountered it.
I can certainly relate. I mean, I was wrestling with many of these questions related to worship. And so you are looking at the traditional Latin Mass. I had a lot of friends doing that, going to those places, moving to those places. Also, as a Catholic youth minister, you're going to all these events that are very much like how you describe.
Yeah.
Even at Steubenville, it was like, well, this feels like a Protestant Hillsong concert with the Eucharist.
Yeah.
And, I was just wrestling with it. I wasn't being like actually even overly critical at the time, but it definitely made me ask very hard questions about what did Christ and the apostles intend? What did the fathers intend?
Mhm.
Why did they so carefully guard the rubrics for worship? why did we have minor orders? Why do we, you just start asking all these questions, and then it starts leading to problems, and you're like, oh my goodness, I'm not sure what to do here. Questions about even just altar servers. I was a
Yes.
Catholic high school theology teacher training up
Hmm.
servers, and there were even times where our priest and the people there were like even just throwing up non-Catholics up there to serve. It was just like,
Lord mercy.
I was just like, I don't know. And I was also just very ignorant because I grew up Protestant. So I was also learning, the ancient thing. And I almost became Orthodox before Catholic. I was wrestling with that uh, for many years, but became Catholic, but then started asking a lot of big questions about worship. And so, yeah, led me to very similar conclusions as you. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to denigrate Catholics, but we did have so many experiences, even in college. My wife's going to a Catholic college, and there were many times when she'd go to a mass, and the priest there would say, "Oh, everyone here is welcome to receive communion." They would announce it, and there were lots of people that were there that were not Catholic, and frankly, those priests knew, you know. So why do I think about these things? Why do I kind of keep them in my mind? It's because, like you said, it we take our faith very seriously, and we ought to. It doesn't mean that everything that everybody does in the Orthodox Church is perfect. We're not immune to folly. There's still sin, but at the same time, there's a clarity of what the faith is. There's a clarity of what the practice is. As I tell my catechumens and new people that come to the church, nothing in the church is arbitrary. Nothing. Nothing we do is arbitrary. And for that reason, nothing that the priests and the clergy can do is arbitrary. I don't just get to decide, instead of the Beatitudes on this Sunday, we will actually sing some praise and worship for the third antiphon. I don't get to decide that. And if I went temporarily insane and I had that idea and convinced myself it was going to happen, if any one of my parishioners found out that I was serious and I was going to do that, I probably would come to church on Sunday and the locks would be changed. I would, at the very least, someone would be calling the bishop, and I might actually be suspended before Sunday happened. But you see, there's a clarity there, and you know, it really became obvious to me that clarity was lost for the Catholic Church, sadly. And I mean, I lament that. I don't think it's a good thing. But I'm not trying to kind of, you know, prop up our position and say that we're better, but that's what I found, and that's what drew me to Orthodoxy, is that we have this clarity of faith, and the people do take it seriously. We're not always the greatest examples, but we know what is Orthodox and what is not. There's not even a question. It's not even a question, you know.
Kind of runs into the bones, like, of people
Correct.
having a visceral reaction to things that wouldn't be orthodox, and that doesn't, it's not perfect by any means, but this is where you can kinda confidently say we generally know, like, what orthodoxy is gonna look like in America 100 years from now, Like, there might be big questions about how to structure
Yeah.
things, but when it comes to, like, parish, on the ground, worship, this is the faith, this is how we live. I mean, I have many Catholic friends who agree with that statement,
Yeah.
and they're not sure what the Catholic Church is gonna look like on the ground 100 years from now in America.
Yeah.
And so it's a sorrowful thing. I actually, I think I appreciate you being acknowledging that sorrow, because I think that's important. This is not like a triumphalistic statement. This is something that produces sorrow, and we hope that there is change, like, for what can happen. But uh,
Yeah.
back to your story, you're talking to your wife, and you're talking about your grandkids and wanting to pass on the faith that established the universe, the faith of the ages, to your grandkids and great grandkids and all that. What was that transition like in becoming Orthodox with your wife at that time and
you know,
entering in?
ac- Actually, it was pretty straightforward. We had been attending Orthodox churches, as I mentioned, for Vespers, and occasionally for some liturgies. Even though we weren't Orthodox, of course, we were not receiving communion, obviously. But we pretty quickly talk with the priests. They see, Orthodox churches, especially missions, are small. The priests see somebody come in, and the people see come in. They're always pretty jubilant. That's not anything new. That's not something that's just happening now that we have this big explosion of new people. That's been going on for a long time, especially in America. There's always this joy, and so that's kind of the norm. So, I asked my wife to come to some services with me. And she said, fine, that's fine. So I believe we went to the liturgy for, I want to say it was Holy Ascension. And, the church that we went to, it was a mission. It was a little storefront, literally in a storefront. It was like in a strip mall in Arizona. And, there was a Asian restaurant in the parking lot. And then on one side was a ballet studio. And I forget what was on the other side of the church. It was one of those odd, buildings where it had a big glass pane windows in the front. And that's where they did, the coffee hour. So you kind of had to walk through that, and then you'd walk back in this corridor, and then you'd be in this little chapel. It was kind of like a jewel box of a chapel. And that's where we went to our services when we were in Phoenix area. She went to, I think it was Ascension Liturgy. And I didn't want to press her. I could tell it was difficult because both our families, everybody was Catholic. We were the kind of the first people that decided we weren't going to be Catholic on both sides. I'm German and Irish on my side of the family. My wife is all kinds of, Scandinavian, all those things. But, her dad and mom were married very young, and they're from rural Colorado. But, everybody in her mom's family was Catholic, and then her dad converted to Catholicism. So my father-in-law converted, and he ended up becoming a Roman Catholic deacon. So, we were kind of, in some sense, rebels because we were going to not be Catholic. So it was a big decision for her, And I didn't want her to be pressured into becoming Orthodox just because I wanted to do that. Because I understood that, when you're married, you want to have that unity. And it's for this very reason that, mixed marriages are very challenging. And I, raising my children, I tell them, look, the number one thing is, should marry an Orthodox Christian. And they say, well, people always say, well, don't do that to your kids. That may be challenging for them to find themselves. But I think it's so important for people to understand that, as an Orthodox Christian, our faith is at the center. Christ is at the center of everything that we do. And so you want him at the center of the marriage. You want to be on the same page about faith. So I impress it upon my children, and then we try to give them as many experiences as we can so that they are able, to meet an Orthodox Christian, so that, God willing, if that's their calling to be married, they can be married to an Orthodox Christian. So they attend camps and things like that. And, they're homeschooled. There's just so many opportunities we've created on purpose for our children. As somebody that grew up Catholic, that's not really what my parents did. And again, I don't say that to fault them, but, it just wasn't as much of a priority. The idea was, well, it would be nice if you married a Catholic, and you should, but it wasn't kind of like the number one. And for my children, I try to stress that it's the number one. You really want to have that unity. So I didn't want to press my wife because I knew that it was a difficult decision, but I prayed and desired it and I wanted. But after that liturgy, I just gave her, we were driving the car, it was quiet, and I didn't say anything. And I just, after a while we were driving, I said, well, what did you think? And she said, I think I'm ready. I said, really? She said, yeah. Well, and again, at that time, we actually were not married. We're not married. So we were getting prepared for all of those things. I was still living with my dad. She was still living with her parents. So the transition was actually fairly straightforward once we got to the point where she decided she wanted to be Orthodox. because at that point we had been attending Eastern Catholic churches. We already been attending Orthodox church for Vespers and liturgies and things like that. And so we did get married in the Catholic church, in the Melkite church. But we knew that it wasn't going to be long before we were going to become Orthodox. And, perhaps we should have done things a little bit differently, but we didn't. We didn't. We got married in the Catholic church. We got married in the Melkite church. And then essentially we just, we went on our honeymoon. And when we came back from our honeymoon, we just started going to the Orthodox church. It's kind of maybe not the best way to do it, but that's how it was.
You're telling your story, so you can't lie about your story,
No, it happened the way that it happened,
Yeah. And these transitions they can be messy, and
Yeah.
you pray through them, and you do your best at the time where you find yourself. We were dealing with this as a family as well, and one of the things that I was really trying to impress upon my kids and my wife, and having these discussions, is like, I was really trying to get the phrase "not Catholic" out of their heads, and replace it with "more Catholic."
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that was my experience. Was
Yeah.
okay. We Catholics used to do this. Catholics used to worship this way. They used to fast on Wednesdays and Fridays. They used to do this. And you can go down the line. And for me, it wasn't anything about abandoning anything or leaving something behind. Like, this is our patrimony. Like, this is our heritage. And this is going to actually deepen your Catholic roots. The confusing part is just the word Catholic Orthodoxy, these words that we use in the American denominational landscape. And so I think that was helpful.
Yeah.
And it's been helpful to other people too, to think of it maybe more positively like that.
And I know this sometimes comes across as condescending, and I try never to let things come across that way, because I don't want to be condescending. But I want to be loving and kind and welcoming, and we try to cultivate that in our parish. We have so many people that come, and the church is beautiful, the services are beautiful, but one of the things that I hear so often from people who say, "Oh, I've never been in Orthodox church. First time I've stepped in Orthodox church." They come to our parish, and the thing that they tell me after they come to liturgy, after their coffee hour, they say, "This is such a welcoming place. It's so warm and welcoming." So I always want to be that way, even with non-Orthodox. But, frankly, I know there are some Catholics that are really suffering and really struggling. And what I tell them, again, it's not condescending. It's just honest. I tell them, the Catholicism that you're looking for, it just doesn't exist in the Catholic Church anymore. You only find it in the Orthodox Church now. That's the only place you find it. And what I mean by it is exactly what you said. When you find out that fasting on Wednesdays and Fridays was just the norm, keeping the fast during Lent is the way that Orthodox do it. It was just the norm. Prayer life, just that approach, that the home being the domestic church, like St. John Chrysostom says, that's just the norm. When you find out that that's still here and that it never ceased to exist, then how could you not desire that? Wouldn't you want to be a part of that? It's what you're looking for. You're looking for that fullness of faith. And so I think you're right. I don't think Catholic's a bad word. It's not a bad word. I think you're right. We really are the fullness of the Catholic faith. And so that's what I try to present to people, especially those who are struggling. I have a small, it's not really my group, but there's a small group of people over the years that I've met that used to be Catholic, and occasionally we talk. It's like a little former Catholic club, But I think sometimes Catholics need that, because former Catholics need that, because you do feel there's a little strain from time to time. But I, like my father, who I've talked to many times about this, leading up to his conversion to Orthodoxy, I told him, "Dad, all the good things that you experienced in the church, those are still good. That you don't have to disavow the good things. Whatever's true, you're not disavowing that. It's just being completed. It's being fulfilled to its fullest in the Orthodox Church. And I think once people kind of experience that and come to know that, there's a lot of peace. There's a lot of peace, because they
Mm.
can see it. You can see it in the church. You can see it in the community. You can see it in the relationships that people have.
The First Christian Hymnal. Dr. Shoemaker dates most of these hymns kind of 350 to 400s, where we're getting not just like a little bit of hymns that are praising the saints, but I mean like robust, complex hymns.
lot of them.
Yeah. And they're not just in Jerusalem. Like they're showing up universally. So I'll be doing a mini series, probably 5 or 6 classes by theme that show up in this. It's going to be a lot of fun. So you subscribe to Barrel Age Faith and you can get that. The Wise Phone 2, which I currently use as my phone. It's an amazing phone that helps you not doom scroll or be addicted to social media and other vices because it doesn't have a web browser, but it does function like a phone. You can call, you can text, you can take pictures, you can do videos. It even has apps like Uber and Lyft. You can order food, maps to get around town, all the things that you kind of need in this modern life. While at the same time, being able to have a boundary between you and work or you and distractions. So you can be more present with your family, with your kids, with your spouse, whomever. This has been a very freeing experience for me to have the Wise Phone 2. Again, you can get $40 off through my discount code KING today. Yes. Okay. So you enter into the church and now you're a priest. What was that journey like?
Well, again, I'll try not to say too much and get myself in trouble, but you know, the old adage of do as I say and not as I do is probably somewhat applicable here. When I was young, I had so many people would tell me, aunts and uncles and people would tell me, oh, one day you're going to be a priest. And I always thought, even as a young child, I'm not going to be a priest. I want to get married and have children. Of course, that's not the norm in Catholicism. You and I both know that in some quarters of the Catholic Church, there are people that are kind of clamoring for married men to be ordained. Frankly, I'll just be blunt. I'm a little shocked that that's not the route that Pope Francis went. I was certain he was going to kind of open up the whole ordaining married men to the priesthood in the Catholic Church. But he didn't. I remain a little shocked that they haven't kind of taken the plunge on that. But we know that it's very common now for Eastern Catholics to be ordaining married men. In fact, 20 years ago, you would get some guy from, Missouri or Illinois or something that grew up Protestant. He'd convert to Catholicism, then he'd start attending an Eastern Catholic church, Ukrainian or Melkite or something. And then they decide, well, he needs to be a priest. And of course, this guy's not ethnically any of those things, but they'd send him on a trip to Lebanon or Canada, and he'd be gone for a month. And then lo and behold, he'd come back and he was a Eastern Catholic priest. So it happened in the Eastern Catholic churches. But now I think they've kind of just started doing it. And I actually know several men who were Eastern Catholic that became ordained as Eastern Catholic priests. And in a way, I'm happy for them. I think it's normal. But when I was going to convert, I called the priest on the phone. I said, well, I'm interested in becoming Orthodox. And he said, that sounds good. And I said, I'm also interested in becoming a priest. And he said, okay, I know. That was his response. And we had a very good priest at the mission that we converted. He was a real missionary. Even to this day, he's kind of a missionary. And his name is Father Damien, and he's just a wonderful priest. He's served the church very faithfully. But he really kind of took me under his wing when I entered into the church and spent a lot of time preparing me, for that opportunity. And the way that we ended up going to seminary, I went to St. Tikhon's, was a bit fantastical because we found out that I was going to go. I had been accepted to go to seminary pretty much a month before we moved there. So we had to quit our jobs and we had to get out of our leases and everything and just pick up in Phoenix, Arizona and move onto the other side of the country to live in South Canaan, Pennsylvania, you know? So that's kind of been a theme in my life for things. It's just this, very missionary kind of thing where you just go, it's time, you go. And the Lord opened up all the doors. When it was time to go, we just didn't have any problem going there. It wasn't easy once we got there. You can't really work because you have to go to school full time, and your wife can't really work. So there's a question of, well, where does the money come from? So that was a lot of faith, but it all worked out, thank God. And even in seminary, it was a interesting experience because they don't just honestly, it's probably changed a little bit now. I've been a priest for 13 years, so it's been a while. But when we got to St. Tikhon's, there was no expectation, even though you had picked up your family and moved to the other side of the country, you were not allowed to have any expectation that just because you completed seminary that you were going to be ordained anything, deacon, priest, anything. So it was a lot of faith to go out there because at the end of 3 years, you could just end up back where you started, And in fact, frankly, I didn't find out I was going to be ordained until almost the last semester. And the ordination date was set a couple weeks before I graduated. So I graduated, and then I was ordained a deacon the next day. And we had planned a family trip to Ireland, the motherland for us former Irish Catholics. We had planned a trip, so I got ordained a deacon, and 2 days later, we were on a plane to Ireland, and I spent 3 weeks in Ireland. And so most of my diaconate was in Ireland. And, I knew that I was going to go to Colorado, so we came back from Ireland. We were in Pennsylvania for another 3 or 4 days, and then we just got in our U-Haul with all of our stuff and drove from Pennsylvania all the way to Colorado. And that was, got there. And a couple weeks later, I was ordained as a priest at Holy Theophany. So.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, so that's kind of the wild journey that we went on, so.
Well, it is a journey. Life's wild, and he wants to send us. He says, where am I going to send you? Lord, send me. Isaiah chapter 6. So we have to be prepared, whatever that might look like. So
Absolutely.
So you've again, we talked about in the beginning of the interview. You've jumped around from state to state. You've settled in Arkansas. What are you seeing on the ground right now? I mean, this has been a big conversation point the last kind of year or two, where
Yeah.
what happened with you and to a certain extent me, where you're discovering orthodoxy in old books or running into somebody. Now people are discovering it online by
Yeah.
reading the fathers, watching podcasts, and people are showing up. I mean people that maybe they've never even been to church before,
Yeah.
and they're coming in to say, "I think Christ is real. I want to check out the
Yeah.
Orthodox Church." It's like, this is a huge moment. What are you guys seeing on the ground where you are in Arkansas?
It's so beautiful, and it's such a blessing. When we first started seeing people, it didn't seem out of the ordinary. In my mission experience, we had so many great teachers, and I had such a great, group of professors at seminary. In fact, when we were in seminary, several seminarians got together and formed a group we called the Mission Rebels, because we decided what we wanted to do when we got out of seminary. What we're going to try to do is we were going to try to plant missions. And so how does that happen? How do you show up in the middle of nowhere, just in the middle of nowhere, in a little town which has hardly any population, and plant an Orthodox mission and be there faithfully and allow it to thrive? How does that work in a concerted way? So we had a series of meetings that we did together. And I can say, what was really beautiful is that of the 12 seminarians that kind of met in this little rebel group that we had that was not sanctioned by anybody, pretty much all of us went on to go and be priests at missions in the beginning or for a while. Father Joel Wilson, who's in Rolla, Missouri. What an amazing example of that kind of effort. And Father Nick Aiello, who's out in Oklahoma, another great example. Father David Bozeman, and Father David Morrison in Bozeman is another great example. Just so many people like that were in our class. And so we kind of were hoping that what we're seeing now would be what happened, right? But it didn't quite happen that way. Mission life is challenging. But I did settle into, and I got used to, a certain pattern. You go, you make the choir nice. It doesn't have to be, Valam chant style, but it has to be nice. The services have to be beautiful and orderly. And, you take a page in the book of Protestant approach where you go out and meet people in the community. You give your mission a face to the people in your city where you're at, so they know, look, this is Orthodox churches here. You go out and do things, and you meet people, and you encourage your parishioners, even if there's 10 of them, to do the same thing. Invite people to church for Vespers. Invite people to this. If you can, make some videos, things like that. I remember Father Nick Aiello, he did this amazing thing with his little mission in Oklahoma. And he had done mission work as a Protestant before he became Orthodox. But him and Father Joel, they went out to this tiny town that just didn't have hardly any population, by a lot of people's city standards. And they rented a little space in this industrial area, and they did reader services because neither one of them were ordained. During the summer, they did reader services every day. And Father Nick made a little website, and he made cards that would point to the website. And this is like 15 years ago. So he made this, and then he would go to the little diner in town, and he would have coffee after the services, him and Father Joel. And they did that for 2 months. There were no Orthodox Christians in that town. At the end of the summer, there were 10 people coming to their mission. And of course they got the bishop's blessing. This wasn't just like a strange thing that they did, but they got the permission to do this. And they did that. And to this day, that congregation is there. It's St. Basil's in Weatherford. It grew into a community, and Father Nick was ordained a priest and went back there and became the priest. So there was a lot of effort. There was a lot of energy, a lot of an anticipation. People wanted to do this. Priests wanted to do this. But I would just tell you, having 10 catechumens was just seen for us in the missions was just like, wow, this is really happening. Things are really going. Now, it's hard to remember when I had 10 catechumens because there's just so many. It's just been an explosion of people coming to the parishes. And, when I first got 10, I thought, this is great. And then I got 15, 20. I thought, well, okay, and then it started getting 30, 40. We haven't quite broke 50 yet. But I am at this stage in my parish where I'm chrismating or baptizing. And it's every time I do that, new people are showing up, and there's people in the line to become catechumens. So I can't get my numbers down of catechumens. We're hovering at close to 50 because I just can't prepare people fast enough to receive them fast enough to keep the numbers down. So it's it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. So we're seeing that on the ground. And I'll tell you what, it's as much as it's a blessing, priests can only do so much. So I'm grateful to see some of the responses that our churches, our hierarchs are taking to this. I just saw that St. Vladimir's is put together what looks like a phenomenal lay catechism program. And I think that is going to be so integral. It's not that I don't want to teach catechesis or don't have time, but, it's just that the people that we have coming into our church, they need so much. They need so much. They need church history. They need spirituality. They need, human connectivity and, things like that, that it's a huge endeavor. And so it's such a blessing to have those resources being put together. But that's what I'm seeing on the ground. It's just like this big movement, not of just people coming to church, but also people now being involved in bringing people into the church by their love, their kindness, their relationships, and sometimes stepping up in these lay leadership roles that actually are really necessary. They're vital, because the priest can't do everything. There's 24 hours in the day, and I still can't do everything, even if I don't sleep. I can't. And my parish isn't even that big. We're probably only at about, counting children and adults, we're probably only at about 200 right now. But I can tell you, if we were at 400, we'd need another priest. Absolutely. It would not even a question. But we even need more deacons. I mean, I would love to have 2 or 3 deacons at my parish right now. So that's kind of what I'm seeing. And it's the norm for what the priests that I'm talking to, it's the norm all across the country. Even some of these small missions I served in Mississippi, one mission I served in Mississippi, they don't have a full-time priest yet, but during Holy Week and Pascha, they received 14. I remember when I was going to the mission and 14 people would show up for a service. They received 14 catechumens, and they have more catechumens. So
praise be to God. Yeah.
I think amazing. It was Deacon Seraphim and Matthew Namey just did a video where they were talking about that they estimated something like between Lazarus Saturday and Pascha, Holy Saturday, that across the country, 16,000 new Orthodox Christians were received, people received in church, 16,000 new Orthodox Christians. And they were doing the math on it, saying right now, just to sustain the level that we expect, which in some ways is very taxing for the average parish priest, including myself. But we need 80 new priests right now, for those 16,000. So yes, it is phenomenal. It is far beyond what we kind of thought. And honestly, I don't see it slowing down at all. I don't, especially because we have so many young people, young families. Our church now is full of people in their 20s and 30s, young families with children, just full to the brim. And we're not even stopped growing yet. So that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah, it's awesome. I think about this a lot. Why is this happening? There's a lot of factors you could point to. I mean, one is, well, priests like you who started missions, that's critical. Secondly, we have Google Maps now. I mean, how did you find an Orthodox church before Google Maps? I mean, you gotta you have to go kind of find a website, maybe and then before that, so is it even just a tricky thing to find where these little missions are located, because they may not even show up?
When I was in Colorado Springs, I worked at Hagia Sophia coffee shop, which is a coffee shop that Father Anthony had started with some parishioners. And it was great because I was there, I was in my cassock, I was serving coffee. I was able to talk to people that would come in. They would ask me, because I was dressed like a priest, they would ask me about Orthodoxy. But people were not just going to just call me on the phone to talk about Orthodoxy. But I did get to talk to a lot of people because they came into the coffee shop. But now people do that. They just call me on the phone. They just email me out of the blue. And it's really quite astounding, from all over. And the kind of dynamic we have in Fort Smith, it's not a big town. It's only about 100,000 people. But the way that Fort Smith is situated, it's in western Arkansas. If you live in eastern Oklahoma and you live in that kind of southeastern quadrant, this really is the large city. So we get a draw from everybody that's, east Oklahoma, everybody that's southeastern Oklahoma, everybody that's west Arkansas, and pretty much anybody that's about an hour east of us, because there's no Orthodox church until you get to Little Rock, and that's a couple of hours away. So, we draw from a large area, and people drive an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours to come to church for liturgy. And this is actually normal for Orthodox churches. It's really quite something.
It is. Yeah, we have the same dynamic. I mean, we drive an hour and 15 minutes. Lots of people in our church drive an hour plus. And part of it is our big city is blessed with Orthodox churches, but we really got to hit those medium to small size cities, towns, kind of the next big wave. Uh, and it's happening. Like missions are starting,
Yeah.
and praise be to God, it's happening. So it's pretty cool to see. But I think of like Google Maps happening, COVID happened, and Orthodox churches started live streaming.
Yeah, I think a lot of like you said, a lot of the connectivity is starting to happen because of internet and effort that was put forth before. It's an interesting question to think about, and I've thought about it myself. I know a lot of priests have considered, why now, and where's it all coming from? I guess a confluence of things is probably part of it. Certainly, things are not going great in the world. And well, it does seem that when things are kind of going up and down, when things are not going great, people do turn to faith. And yet, it we have so many young people. I can't stress that, not be in a triumphalistic way, but just it is something that people come to our church and say, "Gosh, you have so many young people, so many families, so many babies." But I don't know that it's one thing, but it definitely is a lot of these small and large things, especially children. There was a time when people kind of openly scorned children, and now it seems like a countercultural thing to have children, have a lot of children. Even the more you have, the more antagonistic you are to the culture. It almost seems like that, almost like a punk rock kind of thing to have a large family, you know. But what I think that is reinforcing this is that orthodoxy is hard. And there is a bit of a paradox that is almost indescribable, and it really kind of is. But it's the fact that it's hard that I think is drawing people. It's not easy. It's not a chameleon. It doesn't look like what they see. And it's not that it's exotic, but it's just not a facade. It's a challenge. There's an asceticism, a struggle to it. And I think people are responding to that because there's so much in the world that's so easy. It's just so
Right.
easy. And but it's not satisfying. I have this conversation with my catechumens sometimes, and new people sometimes, where I tell them, frankly, the technology exists. I'm going to say some things. Please don't be upset. But frankly, the technology exists for really bizarre things. Like if we wanted to, we could have all of these screens in front of the church. And where there are icons, we could just put up screens and we could change out the screens. We have technology. It just roll through. We don't have to have the same icons. We could have all these great icons of Christ and the Theotokos on our iconostas, right? We could have some really amazing high quality images, right? We could do that around the church, right? We don't need candles in the church, beeswax candles. We've got electricity. We've got all these things. We could have scents instead of incense. We could have scented, air fresheners or what. I don't know. All these technology exists, right? And yet we don't do it, right? We insist. Yes, we can have an icon print, but the pinnacle is to have hand painted icons, which takes time and effort and skill and money. We could have all electric lights, but we insist on still having beeswax candles and lighting tapers and having oil lamps and all these things. Why? Is it because we're enamored by the novelty of something that feels ancient? No, not at all. Because it's real. It involves effort. It involves struggle, and it's not a fake version of something. It's part of our faith. It's immersive. There's a connectivity there. So it's a theological reality for us that we have these things. A lot of people will look at a beeswax candle and come into our churches and think, "Oh, that's quaint. Orthodox Christians still burn beeswax candles," but they don't realize that for us, it's not just that it looks beautiful, but it's theology for us, and it's worship for us. And so we don't want to give it up. We're going to do it, even though it's impractical. It's not easy. And I think that people are responding to that because, frankly, a lot of stuff in the world is fake now, and it's not satisfying. and they're finding the satisfaction in Christ in living that Christian life. I think that's one of the things that's the prime thing drawing them in, and definitely keeping them in the faith.
Yeah, the whole point about there being so much fake now and we're entering into what sociologists will call reality collapse. You don't know what's real anymore. And Orthodoxy, I really do think is it's like this counter to that entirely. Like it's just in the bones, the way that Christ established his church is to be this organic, living organism that is authentic, that is real. Yeah, people with problems too, you know. Um,
Yeah,
I even know people who it's like it might be the only time they give up their phone is when they're at church, you
yeah,
know. And so there is a kind of freedom from the machine, from the technology that's enslaving us.
yeah,
Worship's the only time people, not for everybody, but for a lot of people, it's their time where they also let it go,
yeah.
and they're finding a sense of freedom for, 2 or 3 hours in the services.
Well, I have to admit, my spiritual father, who was Father Alexander Addy, who of blessed memory, who reposed several years ago. I think often of the things that he shared with me and what he taught me. I've had really great mentors, uh, Father Thomas Moore in South Carolina, even just the clergy in our own diocese, Father Marcus Birch, Father Peter Robuchon. There's just so many priests that I've known, and it's in some ways being a priest is so hard, it's so challenging, but in some ways it's actually easy when you have such stellar examples of priests like Father Anthony Carbo, and people to call your brothers, these men that are really serving sacrificially. It's inspirational, it keeps you going. But my mentors, not that they were mean, they weren't, they were loving, but they just were never willing to take the easy path. Father Alexander Addy was in Louisville, Kentucky, and he suffered a lot in the beginning, but he had a spiritual father who was a monk on Mount Athos, who really instilled that Athonite way of life and spiritual life into him. And so Father Addy took that to heart and really tried to live out that faithful servanthood as a priest in his parish. And so one of the things that he established, and it's an Antiochian parish, large. When he told me when they got there that on the books they had something like 400 parishioners. And if you've ever been to St. Michael's in Louisville, Kentucky,
I have. Yes, I've
yeah,
been there once. Yeah.
that's one of the biggest Orthodox churches I've ever been to in my life. I don't want to say it was offensively big, but it's really big. He told me one time that he had a phone in the altar, not because it would call out, but so that he could pick it up and it would like flash on the other line, but the other line was in the choir loft. It was the only way he could communicate with the choir loft. It's such a huge church, you know? And I think he told us, this was like, again, 14 or 15 years ago, he told us that for Pascha, they had like over 1,000, it's a huge church. And yet his spiritual father had given him, kind of like the spiritual mandate to really take his faith seriously. And he ended up building that beautiful chapel there and having daily services. And that was what Father Addy instilled, is that daily services are the norm, not the exception. They're the norm. And the church should be open every day so people can come to pray. So, after being here for a couple of years, that's what I did in November. We started daily services, November of last year. And I think it's so important because I do think that the next big hurdle we have to get our people over, especially the new people, is like the living of the faith more thoroughly. And I just don't think we're going to get there unless we have daily services. Our churches have to be open because, frankly, the world's not getting better, and they're in such need of the spiritual healing that comes with attending the services. Frankly, I have so many people come to me and ask me what book to read, or what father to follow. And I never discourage people from reading. I have a lot of my people that want to produce a lot of catechetical resources, and I understand it. I think it's helpful. But the main catechesis is the services. The main catechesis is coming and praying in the church and living the liturgical life of the church. And it dawned on me, I don't know why it took me so long, but it dawned on me, even just this year when I was celebrating the services for Holy Pascha. Oftentimes we get new people and somebody will tell them, oh, don't come to the Pascha services because, they're really long and overwhelming. And it's true. They're so beautiful, but it could it's basically like almost like trying to take a drink out of a fire hydrant. If that's your first service, it's really something. But really everything that we believe is right there in the Paschal services. Father Addy would tell us that his spiritual father, Father Isaac, said that he lived from Pascha to Pascha. That's how he lived his life, from Pascha to Pascha. And I think part of it is understanding that those Paschal services really reveal our faith. If you look through the service, and I don't cut anything from my Paschal services. My wife will tell you, she's a choir director. We say every litany. We sing every hymn. So our Paschal service is long. We start at 11:30. We do the dialogue at the door. We do the procession. We sing all of the litanies. And I think this year we finished our service around 3:30 a.m. We had about 215 people at church. Last year was 130. 2 years ago was 80. So, the first time we went around the church, I had to stop everybody because people are still coming out of the door. We're singing that resurrection. But, it's all there in some sense in the Paschal services. And so actually it is a fitting service for someone to come to, even if it's their first one. Now there's a lot to unpack, but it's a reason it's called the Feast of Feasts. It's not an accident. And I also think that beautiful homily that we read by St. John Chrysostom, he's not known for short homilies, but here we read this short homily from St. John Chrysostom. And it's just so beautiful. And even to think that he has the honor of being the father of the church, whose homily we read at the Feast of Feasts. All of these things I think about constantly in our faith, not just how beautiful it is, but how much we're drawn into the life of Christ through these things, through the beautiful treasuries of our faith that the Lord has given us. And how can you not be joyful? I mean, how can you not just want to live from Pascha to Pascha?
Yeah, I'm going to write that down. I'm going to write that down. Live from Pascha to Pascha. That's a good line.
I think the world does tend to drag us down, but that's why we need the services. We need the church so much. And yes, we should do our daily prayers. Yes, we read scripture. But I think we have to go back to this norm of having church every day. I really do. I mean, I don't expect my parishioners to come 7 days a week. I don't. But I will tell you what an immense blessing it was to go from 15 children to over 80 plus children just in 3 years. And to be able to tell my parish council, some of these children who've never been Orthodox, who've never even been Christian, some of them are growing up, going to the church 3 times a week, 4 times a week. A whole generation right now is being raised going to church 3 or 4 times a week. It's it's overwhelming. I just don't know what to say.
Well, it's a completely different. It's a completely different sort of witness to the world, where if you present children who have been shaped by prayer rather than shaped by screens, you're gonna see some significant difference in outcomes.
I think so.
If you talk to the psychologists, if you will, the brain on prayer.
Amen.
A lot different. So that's a wonderful gift. That gets me very excited. And I think, number one, even if people do live far away, well, first of all, they're more apt to move if they see that gold, that the daily services being offered. There is this incentive. Secondly, when new missions begin that are closer to these people that are traveling, the program is there for daily services because people, maybe 100 people have already been living in it. So it's easy to be replicated. And And so that to me just sounds amazing. I know we have a new mission up in Muncie, Indiana, Serbian mission, and they do daily services right next to Ball State University.
Yeah.
And he's very serious about that. So it's really cool to see that happening. And I think God's gonna use it to grow a lot of fruit, a lot of
Well,
fruit.
you touched on something that I think that is really important, which is like what you said. People will move to be a part of these communities. I remember, when Rod Dreher was talking about the Benedict option and that kind of thing. I don't have any comment on that other than to say that the idea that people would move to be a part of community is proven. It will work. And frankly, the truth is, especially in America, you could just about live anywhere you want to, if you wanted to. There's enough upward mobility despite the challenges that people face that many Americans can move around. And especially, like you mentioned with COVID, a lot of this remote work that they're trying to get rid of, I think it's too late. They opened the Pandora's box on remote work, and people are not going to give it up. So it's going to be, frankly, I'm not even sure that companies can really discontinue it. But with things like remote work and even the upward mobility and technology, the way that it is, people can move and have moved and do move. And one of the things that I have been talking and discussing with my parish about is this reality that you can work a job anywhere, you can live in a house anywhere, you can love your house anywhere, you can love your property anywhere. Those things can be done. They can be accomplished in just about any city, you know. So if we want people to be at our church, our parish, in this city, we really have to be loving and welcoming and have to have this beautiful community, because frankly, that is something that is so important to people, especially now, that they are willing to move a place and maybe work a job and make less money and struggle harder, but to live in this beautiful community. Father, again, just I kind of stumbled across this because of Father Addy, and then seeing it in action in Colorado Springs at Holy Theophany, because they did that. Father Anthony did that. He had that model 20 years ago. But Father Addy is the one that told me about it, but I saw it happen in Colorado Springs. And then ever since then, I've said, this is what we need to be doing wherever we are. This is what we need to be doing. But Father Addy was told by Father Alexander Schmemann, when you go to Louisville, Kentucky, he said, Addy, you have two things you need to do. You need to fix the revolving door on the rectory, which means when you go there, you have to stay there. Don't move. Don't leave. Stay there. Because they had a number of priests in their time, and it was just like they were going in, going out, going in and going out. So that was the number one thing. Go there and stay there. And then the second thing that Father Alexander Schmemann told Father Alexander Addius, he said, you go down there and you make that place paradise. You make it paradise. And I think sometimes we're tempted to forget that. All of our churches, when you walk into this church, this is paradise. Christ is there. The living God is there. It is paradise. And it's our paradise, and that it's that way whenever we have the churches, wherever they are. It's this holy place. Father Addy had told us, I can tell which church is a church that's active and a church of prayer because it smells like liturgy. You walk in and you can smell the prayer. If you're burning incense, if you're doing the services, you can smell it. I had a catechumen recently tell me he went home and he realized he still smelled like church. These things are really important, but they are vital for our health in the spiritual life. And we really can't take them for granted. We really have to be 100% in prioritizing living them out. That's what we have. We have paradise in our churches. So that's what we do. We make our place paradise.
Amen. Yeah, I discovered St. John Chrysostom's kind of values of hospitality in his homilies.
Mm,
While I was in college, I was still Protestant, and but he was really the first father. I mean, I had read some Saint Ignatius of Antioch and Justin the Martyr and many of the apostolic fathers, but it was Saint John who really captivated my heart with his value of hospitality and caring for the stranger, making your
mm.
home a place of hospitality, and that was kind of my hook. And so it's something I've always carried with me. So when we're talking about like make your parish the home of homes, like you've got
Yes.
all these little homes surrounding really where people value their home, which is the parish, the place of prayer, the place of eating together and
Yeah.
confessing and all these things that make us human, that make us sons and daughters of God. That's where it happens. And that's what makes it paradise. Obviously, we're far from far from perfect. Uh,
I,
but paradise is God coming to be among us.
I've been working on an idea, and I mean, if somebody steals it, it's fine. But I've been working on an idea for a while. I've never wanted to write a book because I'm just not that guy, and it wouldn't be that good anyways. But I've been working on a kind of a trilogy of ideas. I've already been giving homilies about it, but um, in some ways, I'm kind of surprised nobody is kind of presented this way. But asceticism is so vital to our spiritual life because we really need to undergo that struggle, especially because of the world that we live in. But there's this theme about asceticism in our lives that I think is so important. So that the kind of trilogy of themes that have been considering and discerning and praying about and trying to figure out how to get it out in one form, but is the asceticism of parish life, the asceticism of married life, and the asceticism of family life. And when I talk about asceticism, I just mean it in the sense of what we talk about in the church, which is a struggle. We sometimes are tempted to forget that parish life is a struggle, and that is okay. But we're not just at the church for ourselves, we're at church for other people, and we need to be there for them. God didn't accidentally put us in the community that we're in. So my people in Fort Smith, I try to remind them often, you're not here by accident. We don't believe in some strange version of predestination. I mean, of course you have, your will, but God didn't have this concept that like, oh, just so and so just shows up. That's the way it is. It's not arbitrary, and first and foremost, you're here for one another. So in our communities, we are there for one another. That's why we are there. It's not just to come on Sunday and from 9:30 to 11:30 go to liturgy and then go home. That's not the Orthodox life. We are there for one another. Now, I'm not saying, you have to be everybody's best friend. You do have to love them. Sometimes, too, though, we think, oh, I love people, but I don't like them. No, you have to like them too. I'm sorry. I know people are going to really not like to hear that, but you do. You have to like them. Resentment is a sin. Uh, we sometimes we feel like we're justified in our resentment or our bitterness. Those things are sin because they take us away from God. So yeah, we should like one another and we should love one another and we should understand that it is hard to do that. But that is how the Lord draws us to him, is through that struggle. So if we don't take the opportunity, we're depriving ourselves from that grace that God is giving us. We're depriving it. He's giving us the opportunity. If somebody is in a parish and they're annoying, God loved them, but we need to be able and willing to be patient with them. It doesn't mean that we have to eschew boundaries. I mean, we have order in the church. There are boundaries, but we need to understand that there is that asceticism. Now, I think for us that are married, we understand well the asceticism, or we have some insight into the asceticism of married life. But raising children is a challenge, and there's an intertwining between these things of this asceticism of parish life, the asceticism of married life, and the asceticism of family life. And some people would say, well, why make a distinction between married life and family life? Well, because I see this asceticism of family life is kind of like the in between parish life and married life, right? I see it as like that in between because our parish is also our family. So there's overlap in between the married life and the parish life in that way, and we do have that responsibility, not just to ourselves, but to one another in the parish. You know, one of the challenges, speaking of that we're facing in our parishes is all these new children that come into the church. And frankly, a lot of parents who may not have ever been to a church where children were allowed to go to church with them. That may be
Mm.
shocking for people to find out. It was shocking for me to find out. But there are some churches in our country where you go to church and then your children go somewhere else. Ridiculous. That is ridiculous. How are you a family? You know, in my family, we try to have dinner together every single night, you know, as a family. But imagine, and it's not hard because it's probably fairly rampant in America. Imagine no one ever has dinner. No one ever eats meals with you. You're a family, but you never see each other. Or some of the family spends time with the other and the other family, no. How is that? That's not, there's nothing Christian about that. That's a secular mentality. You know, our parishes are a family in that way. You know, and it is a challenge. It is a struggle. But I think that we have to be patient with one another. We have to understand that, yes, children are going to make noise and they need to, you know, learn how to be in church. But the worst thing that we can do is to receive this gift of new people coming into the church and then alienate them and neglect them. We've been praying for this. We have an obligation now to take care of these people. Each and every one of us, especially those of us who've been in the church for some time, you know, and we have an obligation to be patient with them, to be kind with them, and to be loving with them. You know, if we look at somebody else's child and we say, that's not my kid, biologically, of course, that's not your child. But that parishioner is in your family, in your parish family. And, you know, frankly, that child is a full, excuse me, a full member of the church. In the Orthodox Church, when you're baptized, when you're chrismated as a baby, you become a full member of that church for the rest of your life. So the 6-month-old who's been baptized and chrismated and received communion, they are 100% as much of a parishioner as the 75-year-old person that's cranky and crotchety about children being noisy in the church. They're equal. And so sometimes people say the children are allowed, the children are allowed. And I joked to one of my, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it anyways. I joked to one of my parishioners. I said, you know, maybe next time when the children are very loud and noisy and it's distracting, maybe I'll ask the adults who are distracted to go outside and take a break. You know, and I don't mean that in a mean-spirited way, but I just mean it in, you know, it is a struggle sometimes. But I also think that we forget that our vision of how church happens and is in the present day is not always the experience that everybody had. We like to think that, oh, everything was so quiet and monastery-like in the early church. Ridiculous. Ridiculous.
Yeah,
You
you can
know,
read some accounts. You can actually you can read this stuff, you know.
so you just have to cultivate that patience. We have to be willing to have that extra love. And I guarantee you, if we do that, if we enter into that asceticism, God is going to, we're going to allow ourselves to receive that grace that God is pouring out on us. Because the people that are coming to our church want to be there. And if we love them and we walk alongside of them and support them, not only will they continue to be there, but their children's children will be there. Isn't that what we want?
Right. Exactly. It's when I think the kids prize the church as their second home or preferably first home,
Yeah.
um, then they're gonna carry that with them the rest of their life.
Yeah.
Their best memories are gonna be there and where they
Yes.
felt the most love.
Yeah.
And so even if they do kind of stray away for a little bit, you hope that those precious memories come back and kick in. And we live in such a culture where it's against children. It's like an anti-child culture where I've seen it get really grow much worsen because when I was a kid, I went to church and we actually went to the service as a Baptist. The kids were in there, and then I remember I remember when it switched or became
Mm,
very popular to have them go somewhere else. And even back then, I felt like this is a loss. We're
yeah.
not seeing it, but this is going to be a loss for them as adults.
Yeah.
Uh, Even if you are keeping them engaged a little bit more as kids. And then I remember also when weddings switched to childless, where it became so popular.
Ridiculous.
And to me,
Ridiculous.
that was what an impoverishment for our culture. Like,
Yeah.
kids don't get to see people get married.
I,
How do they know besides, like, a weird Hollywood TV show, what a wedding is supposed to look
yeah.
like?
Yeah.
And it's to me, it's like it's supposed to be like the Shire. You got this big white tent with a big meal, and the kids are running around, and they're with all their family members, and you're gonna take that away from them? It's so sad to me, and I'm gonna be judged online after saying this line because it's become so popular, but I don't really care. Uh Still love you all, but to me, it shows the sickness of our culture when we can't
Yeah.
have children at a wedding and a reception. Yeah.
100%. I agree with you 100%. And the truth is, children bring such joy. And even in this surge of converts, there's this very bright, glaring example of how they bring such joy. The truth is, many of our adults do struggle becoming Orthodox. They have all of this baggage. They have these hurdles they have to get through, and almost never, aside from the child, maybe, they're a little spoiled or whatever, and they don't want to be in church and focus, but almost never do the children struggle. You show them the sign of the cross, the next day they're making the sign of the cross. They hold their fingers correctly. They're learning the hymns. They don't know how to sing. They don't know how to read any music notes, and yet they can sing Christ is risen. They can sing the hymns of the feast, and their parents are still fuddling through, Holy God or something, right? But there's such a blessing for us in that way, and they're able to be torchbearers of the faith for so many people because they just are willing to receive that faith and to live that faith. We worry so much about what will happen with our teenagers and our young adults when they go off to college in the world, and I'm concerned about that as well. But I do know that if our children are raised in the faith, if it's a priority, they see that faith in action in home, and they see it in the family of the church, that there is an overwhelming chance that they're going to keep with it later in life. And that's even just proven by secular studies. I don't even have to justify that through my faith understanding. That's just a proven fact, and that's why it's so important for our children not only to be in church, but for us to faithfully be in church alongside of them as well, to give them an example.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. My son's only 14, but we already have these active conversations where he's like, "Dad, I don't want to go to a college that doesn't have a
Yeah.
thriving, active Orthodox church right by it," because he would view that as his family.
Yeah.
That's where he wants to be a server. That's where he wants to be every day.
It's beautiful.
He would be very appreciative of the daily services by the college that he goes to 4 or 5 years from now, right? And so that's the gift that you're giving, and it always makes me so sad. Well, I'll bring my kids to church when they can behave, or when they're
Mm.
teenagers, or when they're old. I'm like, that program is not gonna work.
No.
It's completely upside down. We're the ones that you're gonna bring them to church when their brains are beginning to petrify, like our
Yeah.
old,
Well,
becoming stubborn in their ways. Uh,
and I can understand the challenge with children are loud and things like that. I mean, I'm not saying we don't have any kind of order in the church, but you know, I don't want this to sound mean and judgmental, but the truth is, we often struggle with things not because they are challenging, but because of some interior thing that's going on. So there are many times when people are upset about children, and they say, "Well, I came to church to pray." Well, not to be condescending, but you can pray at home, all right? So it's not the only reason you come to have some special experience for yourself. You should value church as that opportunity for worship, as that communing with the living God. But understand, we're all doing this, and each according to his age, his ability, So, of course, children are going to be loud. Some of them are going to screech and stuff. Well, if your child is a little bit loud, then you just take them outside for a moment. But
yeah.
you don't want to ever exclude them. It's
And
that's
also,
destructive.
As parents, we have work to do in the modern world, like, for example, giving our kids times to learn silence in a way
Correct.
in a very noisy world, and of course, that would include times of prayer, but even an example like this where you go on hikes and
Yes.
you are quiet.
Yes.
You just observe the moth or butterfly, or you observe the trees, and you listen to the forest, and you teach them to do that for a half hour or an hour. Well, the church part might get a little bit easier because you're actually doing those kinds of things throughout the week instead of just throwing screens at them constantly. And I mean, we have a lot of work to do as a family when it comes to because my
Yeah.
we're a very loud, loud, wild family, and
Man, we need to hang out more. That's my family.
yeah, we're not, like, out in the woods, like, being super quiet. I'm
Oh,
just like, "This could be a way for us to learn this better." So what
yeah.
I'm saying out through this interview is also advice to myself, but,
Yeah.
we're far from that ideal. But, I just think about these examples where, I'm a very much an outdoor person, and I appreciate the sounds of nature and being quiet and like, "Hey, guys, if we aren't quiet, we're not gonna hear this. We're not gonna see this animal." And then they get real
Yes.
quiet. "Oh, we won't get to see the animal." Yeah, the animal's gonna run away
Yeah.
if we're not quiet. So there's ways to teach the sort of contemplative kind of mindset a little bit more.
And I also think we have to have a little bit of a kind of pricking of our own mindsets as adults. When we consecrate a church, we pray that the altar will be fixed until the second coming of Christ. I mean, really take it seriously, right? But I don't know that we always think about our parishes in those terms, and that might seem incredible for us to say, "Well, Father, why are we thinking about a 100-year-old plan?" But we have some churches like that who have been around for a long time, and I don't think it's wrong for us to make those kind of considerations. So when we're considering our children in church, my oldest son, he's really into music. He's a very introspective young man. Uh, and he serves in the altar. Sometimes he sings in the choir. He helps out watching the kids. Just excellent. He's learned to cook, all these things that you want your child to learn. He's learned them and is continuing to learn them. But a lot of people have no clue. When he was young, when he was 2, 3, 4, 5, he was a wild kid. He was loud, often, garnering stares from people in church and all the things that go along with a loud kid. And, you know, when we tell people that, they're always really shocked. Oh my gosh, well, not your oldest son. No way. How's that? But this is the kind of thing you have to understand. Yes, you go to liturgy one Sunday and a kid makes a noise and it's loud and it's distracting. But you need to understand you have 6,000 more Sundays that you have to go, right? So of course, that's a made up number, but you have to think about it like that. Like this child, you don't want them just in church that Sunday. You want them in church the next Sunday and the next and the next until you die. You want them into the church. That's what you're looking at. That's what you're thinking about. And so we really, if I could just impress, we just need patience. We need love and kindness. That's what we need. And I can't stress enough. A little bit of this kindness it's hard for people to understand how much of a blessing it is. You know, this is why it's such a struggle because it doesn't always come natural to us. But you know, families with a lot of children, large families can tell you just a kind word or just not giving a judgmental stare. You cannot even imagine how much of a blessing that is for the mother, for the father, for the children. It you know it it's actually better than a lot of things that you can think of doing. You're like, oh, here's a gift card for the groceries. I'm like, no, I don't want a gift card for groceries. I just want you to be nice to my kid at church. Right? Do you
Yeah.
understand? That would transform my life so much more. And I think those are the things that we have to get used to thinking about in our Orthodox churches, especially with all our families and children, because that is the thing that we can do that has real, tangible, lasting results for the generations to come. Lasting results.
And we're responsible. Like when we
Yes,
stand
we
before
are.
God at the end of time, yeah, of course, I'm much more we're responsible for ourselves, but I also think directly my own children. But
Yeah.
even those children that are not biologically mine that are at the parish, I am having an impact, a rippling effect,
Yeah.
and I want to be able to see them there with me,
Yeah.
entering into
Yeah.
the kingdom. God willing, I will be too, but, it's one of those things where, we on a Sunday morning, am I concerned that your kids are gonna stay Orthodox
Yeah.
20 years from now? Not just my
Yeah.
own, like, are we concerned about each other's? And, that'll change a parish real fast when we take that kind of responsibility and ownership,
Well, and I hate to start throwing out speculative things, but Orthodoxy is a small world. Even though we're experiencing this growth, we're still not, we're not anywhere close to like the 50 million mark or whatever. But things we need to consider if we want our young people to stay in the church, if we want them to marry other Orthodox Christians, okay? Like, for instance, my sons, I want them to marry Orthodox Christian girls. If I've run a family out of the church, I might have just run out the future spouse of my son. I know that sounds ridiculous to think about, but actually, we need to think about those things.
yeah.
We need to think about that. And we need to think about how we can support through just our kindness the young people that are in the church. They don't need to be rejected or pushed away, but we want our young people to be starting Orthodox families. We have that desire for them to have an Orthodox spouse. That's what we should be cultivating. We should be instilling those kind of things in them, but we should also be supporting them, in their faith in the church and Christ. So I think there's a lot of ways that we can do that. But you mentioned that we need to be mentoring young men, which I think is good. I think we do that, need to do that as well, because there are so many people that are coming to us that are converting now that either come from broken homes or broken relationships, or just there was things that were just never done. They were never learned in their life. And not that we're psychologists or anything like that, but we are a family, and we want to be a functioning, loving family. We don't want our parishes to be dysfunctional families. We don't. And that it's work, it's effort. We have to really, put the time and effort into it, because it could be that our parishes become dysfunctional. We don't want that. We don't want that at all, in any way. We've also been blessed in this country, even though Orthodoxy is small, to have this incredible amount of resources for parish life and parish growth. And so it's not that we're lacking the resources for this, but I do think that we need to be encouraged to put in the time and the effort, each and every one of us. And sometimes people think, oh, I don't have anything to give. And I like to remind people, if you're a warm body and you show up to church, you have more to give than you can even imagine. And
Mhm.
it's okay that you may not even know what that is, how you're a blessing to people. That's okay. That's okay. But I can say, as a parish priest, and I'd say this often in my parish, if you're looking for something to do, if you're looking for a task, or you're looking to be involved in some way, I guarantee you I can find something or a bunch of things for you to do. There's plenty of work. There's plenty
Yeah.
of opportunity. We're not lacking in that at all.
Even
Yeah.
just the simple thing that people can do, and that is just have a cookout with a few families in your church. Like,
Yes.
coffee hour can be overwhelming, particularly with how it's exploding with growth at at the church, and so people can be like, "I'm leaving, this is too many people," or it's just like the extroverts love it, but the introverts are, like, terrified. Um,
Yeah.
so what should you do? Well, then have a family over and have cookout so you can have a quiet, nice conversation and have a couple families over, and you don't have to talk to the parish priest about that. You just do it. Like,
Yeah,
you just,
that's
like,
correct.
you just do it, and then before you know it, you learn about people's needs
Yeah.
because it just comes up. You hear their beautiful, wild story, you hear their needs, and then that's how we take care of each other. Just over a simple meal can unleash all these needs that we didn't know were present.
Yeah.
Uh, you find out about a struggling marriage, or you find out, well,
Yes.
one spouse likes Orthodoxy, the other one's kinda being they need some help, and so even just the love of again, a simple dinner and cookout, it can just do a lot. So I get excited about even just cooking and spending time with people is a fun way for people
Is
to use their
wonderful.
gifts and resources.
And again, not to denigrate our Catholic brethren, but I would say Orthodoxy, especially in America, the blueprint for it is more or less like the village church. I know sometimes we get into these bigger communities that are Orthodox, like for instance, Father Addy's community in Louisville, and that's not quite as obvious. And but he even strove to have that even in his large community. And he preached often like the faith of Orthodoxy and the way that people lived that came to this country and immigrated in the main states. Um, you know, in Alaska, it's a little bit different because you still have villages and you can still have village orthodoxy there very profoundly. But in main states in the United States, people are spread out, and it's not as obvious that you have this kind of village-oriented life when people are driving from an hour or plus away. But there are ways I think that we have been able to and are continuing to cultivate that more interpersonal, intimate, life that's normal for Orthodoxy. Um, and in some quarters in Catholicism, maybe from time to time there was, you know, um, a life where you're like, well, you had the Polish church or you had the Italian church. It's like the neighborhood church. You could have that, and so big cities you had neighborhood churches. But that's largely passed away, and the remnant of that would be something like the Vietnamese Catholic churches, or the Hispanic ministries that they do. Like this is the Spanish speaking church. We have that one of a Catholic church like that in our town here in Fort Smith. There are like 3 Catholic churches, all within more or less walking distance of each other, actually, in the downtown area. But one is very prominently the Spanish-speaking church. So, I mean, you could kind of have something in a sense like that with Catholics. But for Orthodox, it's just so normal. In some ways, I don't need a billion people asking me, texting me, or emailing me, Father, can I have a cookout with this family? But also, it's not really unusual, those kind of things, because you can have more of a relationship with the priest because of the pastoral relationship you have in Orthodoxy, and that's normal. And that model of having a close-knit community, of having a family, is really the norm. Now, of course, when you go overseas, when you go to like Republic of Georgia or you go to Romania, you're going to have the big cathedral churches. Of course, that's part of it. But then you get outside of the city, you have the smaller churches, and you have that normative life that is supposed to be the way that it is. I remember some people telling me, like, when you go to Greece and you go into the villages, they would never have coffee hour at these churches. And the reason why is because you just go to someone's house. You're just walking through the village and you're spending time with people. Where would you go? Why would you have a coffee hour? The whole village turns into coffee hour, right? So even though we can't really necessarily do that all the time in America, I do think we still continue to cultivate something like that through, like what you're saying, opportunity of spending time with each other during the week. And you don't need the priest's permission to do that. You can organize that. You can do it, and that's part of the normative life of the parish. It's a good part of it too. It's important.
Yeah, people sometimes will ask because of all this growth that's happening, "Hey, why don't you guys just have like 3 or 4 masses or 3 or 4 services?" It's like, well, first of all, there's a canon against that. Uh, and it's like, admittedly, it is a pragmatic weakness. Like, it doesn't make sense pragmatically where you could have, all this efficiency and have all these services, where one priest is serving the altar that many times. But obviously, you lose a lot when that becomes the
Yeah,
norm. Liturgically, you lose a lot,
yeah,
but the spiritual fatherhood and pastoral care of one priest to his people is the biggest thing, I would say.
yeah.
I don't I don't know what you think about what's the biggest loss if you were to walk away from that kind of canon where the priest is serving the altar.
Yeah, no, I could only echo 100% what you're saying, and I even to the point where we've gotten to the point in our church. where there are so many communicants that it is challenging. On Pascha, I did, I got a little woozy. Of course, it was festal and there's Holy Week and everything's going on, and I'm running on very little sleep. But I chose this really ornate chalice that we have, and it's for special occasions, and it's like 5 pounds, and so that didn't help. But I'm like hunched over there trying to give communion to everybody at Pascha, and at one point, I've got 2 adult servers holding the cloth. At one point, I just kind of looked at them and I said, "Listen, I'm starting to get a little woozy. If you think I might pass out, grab the chalice, let me fall down, just because." I was getting a little concerning there for a minute, and one of the other server there, he was a bigger guy. He actually grabbed my arm, was like supporting me, my other arm. I kind of felt like I was being lifted up, kind of like Moses or whatever. But it was one of those moments. I mean, it was a blessing, but I realized we do have to be careful. And I think this is why we have to have an eye towards missions. We have to really be cultivating a sense in which, yes, well, let's fix that number. Let's say we need to have this many people, and let's just work towards that. And let's try and have missions and do it in a concerted way where we kind of have that extension of families. You could do like our mission rebels did and just plant a mission somewhere. You could do that. There's nothing wrong with that. It works. But I think we also now have this opportunity in a more concerted way to be, responsible, to be good stewards, to build some financial health, and to kind of do like what some churches and some jurisdictions and some bishops are encouraging. And it's like, well, we don't necessarily need to just let some random mission plant 100 miles away. Maybe what we do is we save the money and we purchase a property. And then we help support that community, that mission, so that it gets stable enough that when we finally cut the tie and we say, okay, this is actually really established, that they're on a good footing. It's kind of like with your children. You want, when they're going to get into married life, you're preparing them so that then when they do launch into married life, they're not just scraping by on sardines and saltines. You've prepared them well. Not that they're rich, they still have to struggle, but they start off their married life on a good footing. I think that model of doing missions is what we're moving towards, and I think it's a healthy model. Frankly, I think we're going to see a lot more parishes with multiple priests, not just deacons, but priests as well. And I think that's good. One, for fellowship. I can speak as a priest in my area. I'm the only priest in Fort Smith. And the closest next priest is about an hour and 15 minutes away. And so there's nobody close. It's just me. I'm kind of in an island. So I have to drive and travel for fellowship. And it's been good. We have good relationships with the priests that are in the area. But it can be challenging as a priest to be in that situation. And it shouldn't be the norm. It shouldn't be the norm. We shouldn't be worried about territory. I have 100,000 people in my city, and if we were serious, really serious about Orthodoxy, we could easily have 10 churches. People say, that's ridiculous, Father. Even if there were 200 people and we had 10 churches at each, that's just a blip on the population. We have room, and I think we need to get more serious about that effort, because people need Christ. They need the church. They're yearning for it. And so, I think we have to kind of work to find ways to bring Christ to them and bring that life to them. And it just takes a little planning, a lot of work, but a little planning. So I think we can do that. I think we need to start looking to that. So I think it's going to be the norm. We'll have priests come and they'll be serving for a year or two in a more well-established church, and then they'll go off to this mission, or they'll go off to this community, or they'll help start this community. And I think that's healthy. I think it's very good. Because also being a mission priest, is speaking from experience, it can be challenging. You're raising your kids, and sometimes they're the only kids in the parish. They need the fellowship. So I think all this is just moving to a more healthy norm for our communities. But it's going to be a lot of work. Thank God. Thank God. Well, frankly, so many of us, let's be honest. The truth is, we need something to do. We just need to. We need to stay active. And what better way than to be about the work of the Lord.
Right.
You know?
Don't grow weary of doing good.
That's
And
right.
if we're not
Amen.
doing good, if we're not like completely dog tired from doing God's work for our lives, then we're off sinning. So it's like, what's the
Yeah.
option you want to take? You know,
Yeah.
um, I like the idea of purchasing land before you even have a mission, in the sense of like, I mean, you think about a married couple or a couple that's preparing for marriage. They're praying for their future child. They're praying for conception. They're praying for a life to come. And a larger parish being able to do that before they even know how it's all gonna come together, praying for land to be opened up, making the purchase, going to that land and even praying there, doing some services there.
Yes.
What a kind of a cool idea where you're already, I don't know, baking the land with prayer,
And
is a
things
cool idea.
like that have already been happening across the country in Orthodox churches. You know, for instance, I told you about Holy Theophany in Colorado Springs. Well, now, not too far from there, in the same kind of area, they have St. John the Baptist Mission. But if you go online, you look at that church, it's a beautiful church. Why? Because Father Anthony had this idea, and the parish had this idea. They had this vision. They said, we're getting too big. We need to have another community. And so they sought to do that. But the thing is that in the time it took them to acquire the property and the time it took them, to get everything set up, and then Father Anthony passed away after they had purchased the property and started working on the building. But in the time that it took them to get that building and complete it, and they built a beautiful Orthodox church on there, that mission is already almost full, and they've really only been existent really for a couple of years, and it's like already almost full, and they have this beautiful property of like 5 acres. So what a great gift. I think that's a brilliant way to go about it, because frankly, why would we, if you were not that the church is a business, but if you were going to come up with a business plan, you say, okay, I got this idea. We're going to put satellite things here. Why would you give money to someone else that's outside of your organization? And isn't that what we do when we're renting storefronts from people, or we're renting a chapel from the Anglicans? Why are we giving them money? Why aren't we keeping the money in our communities? Buy the land, try to build a church there, keep the money there, and that's how we cultivate from the inside. And we have the resources. So many times our people say, we don't have the resources, we don't have the resources, and it might be a struggle, but we do have the resources, and the joy and like the just utter grace that God is going to give us by working for the church is unmatched by any other thing that we're going to do. So it's worth it. It's totally worth it. So this principle of doing mission work and preaching the gospel, what a joy it is. It's invigorating, because every new person that comes in, every new work that's completed, every new icon that we get in the church, it just continues to bring more joy and more joy and more joy, and it just really excites us. So that's we need to tell you another story of Father Addy. He visited his spiritual father one time, and he had a cell on like a little skeet on Mount Athos, and Father Addy went out back, and I guess Father Isaac didn't speak English very well. His Greek was pretty good. His Arabic was amazing, and Father Addy's Greek was not great. His Arabic was here and there, but he spoke English well, right? So they kind of used these little dictionaries and translated between each other, and that's how they communicated. But Father Isaac took Father Alexander out to the skeet, and behind it was a pond. And Father Addy recounted it was a beautiful pond, just crystal clear water. And Father Isaac said to him, "Do you see this pond?" Which obviously he couldn't. It's right in front of him. He said, "Yes." And Father Isaac told Father Alexander Addy, he said, "Don't let your parish become like this pond." Which seems strange, like it's a beautiful pond. But Father Addy realized there was nothing in it. It looked beautiful, but there was nothing in it. There was no life in it. There was no fish. Nothing was inside of it. And so what Father Isaac was telling him is, don't let your parish become lifeless. It needs to be full of life. And, the Lord is giving us opportunities to be full of life. Yes, it's work. But I think it was Father Moses McPherson did a video not so long ago about tithing, which I really loved. It was a short video, but he mentioned, tithing isn't, we think of it like 10%, but really everything. It all belongs to God. So we really do have to switch our mindset to be fully invested in our community. Now, does that mean that we just like throw caution to the wind and dump all of our finances into the church? You and I both know our wives would not be very happy with us if we just gave all. How are we going to eat? How are we going to take care of family? We have to be good stewards, though. And I think that's the point, is that tithing doesn't just mean write a check. It means to be invested. It means to be in that stream of life, to be alive and alive in our community, and to be working in that life of our community, and to want to have that life. So
Right. It's very easy to read the Bible and church history in a very sterile way and miss a lot of those details where, like, you realize that people, like, sold their homes, or their home became the church, or
mhm,
they sold the field so they could have money to give the apostles, and that fed the poor, or it bought, something for the so people were doing this all the time throughout church history, and we forget the sacrifice and the risk because we're like, "Well,
mhm.
that's not responsible." Which I get. If you if you told
Oh,
someone you sold, your 401k and gave it to the church, people are like, "Well, that's not responsible. That's
right.
insane." Right?
Yeah.
But there are times where maybe certain people are called to do kind of that wild thing. Why? Because it's like, well, first of all, the joy is
Yeah.
is is way worth it
Yeah.
than having your life perfectly planned out, right? So, again, I'm not telling everybody to sell their 401ks. I mean, I don't even
Right.
have one, um, it's an opportunity to think creatively and
Yeah.
take some risk for the gospel. Yeah.
And we also have to keep in mind that we don't get to see people's hearts. In some ways, the parish priest has a kind of, view from a mile up, right? Because we hear confessions. So there's things that we, are dealing with pastorally that many times are not known, and maybe oftentimes are never known, you know? And so we have to keep in mind that we're a shepherd of souls in our parish. And so we're never doing things for one person or another. We're faithful to Christ. We have to always be, willing to do what the church is asking us to do, to follow Christ. That's what a priest has to do, no matter what, no matter how popular it is, no matter if the parishioners love it or hate it, you know, that's not what determines it. It determines are we following Christ? But I think we have to keep in mind, all of us have to keep in mind, is that we don't see the hearts of people. We don't know the fullness of their struggle. Sometimes we can know a little bit, sometimes we can know more depending on what they tell us. But it might seem strange, like you said, somebody sell their 401k, but it might seem risky. But what's more risky than anything in the materiality of the world, much more risky, is to play fast and loose with your salvation, and to not be repenting. That's the riskiest, because what's at stake is your salvation. And so
Right.
we have to be careful not to judge people. Um, you know, I never want to judge people. People come to me sometimes and they ask me, Father, should I do this? Father, they want me give me a blessing for this or that thing. And I'll admit, I'm very particular. If the church has a tradition of blessing something, I generally am comfortable saying, okay, this is fine. If I have facing a tough case, obviously I'm going to go straight to the bishop. I'm not going to try to make a decision on my own. But there are many times when people come to me and ask me for things, and I don't bless them. I don't give them an answer, really. I don't say yes or no, because the truth is, I'm not a guru, you know, and I'm not here to run your life for you. You have to prioritize it and make that decision. You have to follow Christ. I can be an example of that. I can give you some thoughts about what I would do, but I'm not here to control people's lives. And I think we have to keep in mind, we don't know. So for someone to give away their 401k or to donate a bunch of money, we actually may not know that could actually be for their salvation. It's not a matter of, oh, this person's really holy. We don't know. We don't know. God only knows. He's the only one that knows that. So we kind of have to practice that asceticism of keeping our eyes on our own plate, so to speak, but also at the same time being loving.
To your point about the riskiness and venturing out into the deep, it's like our Lord, he tells us in the gospel, the parable, that the riskiest move you can do is to bury your talent. Like that's the risky, like everything's planned. I'm taking no risk.
Right.
The no risk move is the riskiest.
Yeah.
And that's the irony of the whole, just to your point where you're saying, it might look risky to the world, but actually the safe life is actually the riskiest move for your salvation. Ooh, I mean, this is speaking to me right now. It's like, wow, that's so true. It's very challenging, but this is the time we're in, and there's no other option. Well, Father Alexis, our conversation went many places today. It was wonderful to hear your story, and then to have like a whole part 2 of an interview where it's like missions and which I think is really something that you really care about. That's why it's coming out as someone who started lots of missions and been on the move.
Absolutely.
Well, wonderful. Is there any way that we can, anything you want to plug as we wrap up the interview, whether it be your parish or things that are going on that you would like for people to either pray for or support in any kind of way?
Yeah. I don't know. In some ways, we're just the local parish in Fort Smith, so I don't really have a lot to plug. I just, if anybody's interested in seeing our parish, they can visit fortsmithorthodox.org. If somebody's passing through, they're headed out west, come and see us. But other than that, no, nothing in particular.
Totally fine. That's wonderful. It is fun when I do these interviews. People will pop up out of the woodwork in those areas and show up. So that's wonderful. Well, Father Alexis, thanks again for coming on the show and sacrificing some of your time to be with us today. And it's a real joy to have you on and to finally get to speak with you through video. I haven't met you in person yet. I need to get out to Arkansas.
I know.
Make a trip.
We got to make that happen.
That would be wonderful. All right, everybody. Again, thanks for coming on the show and listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share this interview with people you think would bless them. And again, appreciate Father Alexis coming on the show.
All
right, guys.
Finally.
Thank you again for coming on. All right, we'll see y'all next time. Bye-bye.
At the beginning of Ephesians, we read of the recapitulation of heaven and earth in the person of Jesus Christ. He unites all things in him. And then near the end of Ephesians, we read about male and female reconciled, harmonized, and put in right order through the work of Jesus Christ and through the imaging of the divine bridegroom in the life of the particular human bridegroom.
This first episode is going to be free to all of you, and the rest will be for paid subscribers. Seraphim, thank you for preparing this Bible study through Ephesians.